there's it's very difficult for left-handed people to write on a whiteboard.
Oh, I know.
Uh, 23. And let's see. And then we also are going to look at numbers. (29), 12 through 40. Okay, I don't know how far we're going to get on this, but we'll get a little bit of it in. Okay, so this is a feast of booths. This was there was 3 times that we recorded in Luke and John that Jesus went to Jerusalem. And I believe this was one of the ones that was identified. There was one third one that it didn't say what the occasion was. It just says he was attending a feast. And let's see, what's our... Without going in and reading all the instructions for this, this was a feast that was taking place late in the year at the harvest time, or the full moon, harvest moon or the full moon. It was a time that they were recognizing God's faithfulness in bringing in all the harvest, particularly the wheat harvest, and it lasted for 7 days. Most of the feasts were 7 days. It was a 7-day feast. And what it was designed to do was memorialize the Israelites' travel from Egypt to the Promised Land. Now, we know they spent 40 years in the wilderness, but the feast was representing that during that time in the wilderness, they lived in booths, which could be tents. And this is tabernacle, that means to be in the presence. So during that time in the wilderness, they lived in these booths, and God provided for them. So that's what this feast is, feast of booths or tabernacle, or I think there's another term that's used for it. So it was a harvest of the crops, and the requirements for this are kind of strange. The priests had to do sacrifices, and that's where this numbers comes in. This gives instructions for the sacrifices they had to do. Each day there would be a morning and an evening sacrifice, which was continual. They always had a morning and an evening sacrifice. But each day during this 7-day period, they would sacrifice 2 rams, 14 lambs, and 1 goat. I guess that goat was some old goat that just was contrary or something, I don't know. But this was in addition to the morning and the evening sacrifice. So each day they would do this. Then there was another requirement that starting on the second day of the feast, they would sacrifice bullocks. And I guess that's some type of a beast of burden or something. I'm not sure exactly. I should have looked that up. But they would sacrifice these bullocks, and each day they would reduce the number that they would sacrifice. And during that time frame, those 7 days, they would do 70. The second day of the festival, they would start sacrifice. They wouldn't do any on the first day. And the first day and the last day of the feast was a day of rest. But they would start, and I didn't write down the numbers. They would start with, say, doing 15 bullocks on the first day, and then the next day they would do a number less than that and go on down. So during that week, they did a total of 70 bullocks. They did 14 rams. Yeah, yeah. It's yeah. It's some kind of a cattle or something, a burden. So during that week, they would do that, and they would do 98 lambs. Had a lot of good eating, didn't they? And the interesting thing about this configuration, 70 bullocks, 14 rams, 98 lambs. Almost sounds like a partridge in a pear tree. But all of these numbers are divisible by 7. 10, 2, and what would that be? 12? 7, 12. Yeah. But anyway, but what it represents is this sacrifice being able to divide it evenly by 7, and 7 is a number which means perfection, completion. Remember, God completed everything, rested on the 7th day. It was complete. Everything was done. And we know that Jesus, in his ministry, he was to be a fulfillment of all of these feasts. And we know with the perfection of 7, we know that where he would be placed in that ministry. And in John 1:14, well, let me back up a little bit. Part of the thing of the Feast of Booths and Tabernacles, this was a place they lived, during this time. They lived in these tents, and the requirement for the Feast of Booths, they would set up tents or booths or all around Jerusalem in the countryside around there. And part of their requirement, the priests had to do all the sacrificing. The requirement of the Israelites, they had to remain in those tents. They would come to Jerusalem for certain occasions during that week. But they lived. They had to live in these tents. And John says about Jesus, he came and he tabernacled amongst us. That means he lived with us. So in essence, here's his fulfillment. Jesus came and lived with us just like the people lived in their tents. He dwelt. It says he came and he dwelt among us, but that word dwelt is tabernacle. The same word as theirs. And then in John, and we're probably going to have to stop on this one. John chapter 7, it talks about when Jesus was in Jerusalem for this particular feast. And I'm just going to read this, and then we're going to have to pick up next time. John chapter 7. And after these things, Jesus was walking in Galilee, for he was unwilling to walk in Jerusalem, because the Jews were seeking to kill him. Now the feast of the Jews, the Feast of Booths, was at hand. His brothers therefore said to him, "Depart from here and go into Judea, that you may, your disciples also may behold your works which you are doing. For no one does anything in secret when he himself seeks to be known publicly. If you do these things, show yourself to the world, for it's not even his brothers were believing in him." So I'm not going to be able to finish that particular part, but Jesus went to, it said he went in secret. Not sure all the logic behind that. He said he wasn't going to go, but then he did go. So when he gets there, it's this Feast of Booths that they're celebrating. And we're going to see next week how him being there, the things that this feast entailed were things that were his life. And I'll just give you one quick one. The priest, they would go to the pool of Siloam, and they would scoop out the water in pitchers, and it would pour this water out. And this pool in Jerusalem, it was the only place in the city where there was fresh water. It was at that pool that Jesus, remember he made the mud and put it on the guy's face. He said, go to the pool and wash, and he'd come back and he could see. So where we connect Jesus in this is there was this water coming from this pool, and Jesus is in Jerusalem, and he, let me see if I have the verse. Now, on the last day, this was the last day of the feast. This is John 7:37. On the last day of the great feast of the feast, Jesus stood and cried out in the wilderness, if any man is thirsty, let him come to me and drink. He who believes in me, as the scripture said, from his innermost being shall flow rivers of living water. So here, the priest obligation was to do this with the water from the pool, and Jesus is there saying, I'm the pool, I'm the living water that is going to be produced for you. So a few other things that we'll look at on that feast, and then I think the one that I will continue with next week is Pentecost. That was one of the other feasts, and I believe that would have been one of the ones that he would have been required to go. It doesn't say he was there, but we're going to see that he was. Okay? Father.